Hi everyone, welcome to what is the second webinar of 2020. I know we had advertised today that we would have a certain Mr. George Caridas joining us. Unfortunately, George wasn't able to attend, but we really looked out. One of the other C-level of the team from Packet, Jacob Smith, who's actually a co-founder along with Zach Smith, was able to join us and come and join us last minute. Now, when I say was able to join us and come and join us last minute, we spoke here just a couple of minutes ago and everything was great. He's actually in Vermont, and I'm just hoping that he can join us just in a moment, that he hasn't got any kind of connection issues or something like that. I would doubt that that's the case, but let's see. I'm sure he'll be along in just one moment here. We're still sticking with the same subject, and a lot of people are going to learn quite a lot about Packet today. Hey Jacob, how are you doing?
I'm great, just dealing with the internet over here, so thanks for your patience.
No problem, no problem. I was just telling people who've already tuned in that I think it's got something to do with Vermont and maybe something to do with where you are, but no worries. Hey, this is all great. Yeah, cool. Great, great. I was just
I think we need to solve the edge. I think we need to solve the edge.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're here to do. I just had this vision of you tripping over a rake or something like that. I don't know why. Maybe that's the kind of thing you have in your area there. I don't know.
We'll find out.
Maple syrup and all the rest. Okay, great. So I had just given like a very, very brief intro talking about the fact that George is not here today, that he's very, very ably and very positively surprisingly here represented by you, Jacob. And I was just saying that you're a co-founder at Packet. We'll come to that in just one moment. And of course, also I know that a lot of people here who will be listening to this both live and recorded later, some of them will not have heard of Packet, we'll come into that, and a lot of people are thinking about the edge in a lot of different ways. So,
great. Well, thanks for having me on, and I'll try to make up for my tardiness.
No problem, no problem. It makes it all kind of real, you know, live TV.
Absolutely, live television, basically.
Excellent. Okay, I'm Dermot. Anyone who doesn't know me who's tuning into this, feel free, please, to reach out to me at any stage. Long-term veteran of the hosting and cloud industries. Fairly new, I would say, to the immersion cooling and cooling space and stuff in data centers. Staying in and around the same thing, but as we all know, when you move 1 inch inside of something, it's actually a brand new area completely. So it's been a wild ride these last 2 years here with Submer, and long may it continue. Just before we get into everything, I know that our marketing team will definitely appreciate me sharing here regarding how and where you can listen and tune into what's happening at Submer. This will be available on our YouTube channel. Some of you are probably listening to it there afterwards, etc. So we do welcome some Q&A, some questions, and we will tackle them more towards the end of the discussion. We might dip into a question or two during the session. Let's see how it goes. But there is the Q&A functionality there, so please, please feel free. Jacob really is probably one of the people who knows the secrets of the edge more so than others. He really knows what the edge looks like, so that could be a good question for him. Just, yeah, put them in during any time and we will come to them when we can. So thanks a million. So Jacob, the picture is surprisingly like you, actually. It's not too far away from where you are now.
Unlike many LinkedIn headshots, right?
Yeah, there's a couple of those where I think that was about 20 years ago, young man, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
Well, I've got my pictures up to date, and I'm happy to share a little bit about my background if it's useful. Yeah.
Please do, please do. Like you and I have only had a chance to get to know one another in person very briefly a few times, but you know, I'm so glad of this chance to get to know you better, and especially in front of everyone here. This is fantastic. So maybe first of all, a little bit more about you, and what was your previous life like, and then we'll probably work in towards Packet then at that stage.
Great, absolutely. So like many people in tech, I came to it in an indirect fashion. So my background is pretty diverse, but I'd say I'm the non-hosting and non-infrastructure co-founder. Most everyone else in my company are, you could say, veterans, right? If you're doing it when you're 18 in 2001, you've got to be a veteran, right? And that's what a lot of the hosting industry has been really built upon, the hosting and cloud industry, as people kind of grew up with the industry. And I came from a different angle. I spent time, first of all, as a professional classical musician. I played in the opera. So the one thing I really know how to do is play the bassoon. But I think that brought me into different parts of the tech world. I grew up with computers, making my own laptops and gaming PCs and figuring out how they worked. But I got into it through the marketing and the user side. I started really trying to understand how customers were trying to buy things online. I ran an SEO and a SEM business for a long time, and really that became a big part of when we started the company. Who's the buyer? What are they trying to do? I think we've all seen that. We call it cloud now, but people are buying technology in a different way. And so it's been a big part of, my role at the company and wearing all the hats. As you do as a co-founder, you get to do a little bit of everything, even if you don't want to. So.
Okay, cool. Maybe just a little bit, again, to those who may not have known so much about Packet, just a tiny bit about how yourself and Zach got started on the journey. What was the real trigger for Packet to be created?
Yeah, that's great. So for those of you who don't know, Packet was started about 5.5 years ago. My twin brother and I actually started the business together, which is a wild ride. He was one of those veterans. He had actually been studying classical music as well, but dropped out of Juilliard in New York to go into Linux hosting in 2001. And, ended up running a hosting company called Voxel and sold it in around 2011. And a couple of years after, he was ready for his next venture, and so was I. I was also at a place, and we were like, gosh, we should really do something together. That would be fun. Because we had this amazing lawn mowing business when we were like 10. So what else could top that, right? And it was really just an idea of, hey, we could work together. And he said the only rule was anything but infrastructure. Infrastructure, it's a big boys game, lots of capital, very mature. We got these clouds coming up, they're doing amazing things. What could we possibly do there? And the funny thing is, we tried for over a year to figure out a business that was not infrastructure. And we just kept coming back to it. We kept coming back to the people we knew and the challenges we knew. And as Tim Hawken at Google says, it's an exciting time for boring infrastructure. And so I really loved that sensibility that here's this massive, sort of foundational element of our world that you walk people around the street and you say, how does the cloud work? And they kind of, look up at the cloud. And for some of us, we look down here and we go, well, I'll tell you how it works, And if that's exciting, that's kind of, that's our space. And so we got into it saying, I guess we should just do it. And it was really about how do we think forward, this was 2014, 15. How do we look forward 10 years? Infrastructure takes a long time, right? Mm-hmm. And when we started, it wasn't about saying, hey, we could go and disrupt the cloud. It was about thinking about what comes next, right? What happens next? And what's that next thing going to need? And we thought, well, it's going to need to be automated. It's going to need to be, a great operated experience. That's the cloud. And then, also it's going to need to be opinionated, and there's going to be a lot of diversity. And, as we scale up, we start to see things, as they say, you start to design the hardware around the software instead of the software around the hardware. Yeah. And so that being a very difficult thing in 2014, and that's really what we got started. And so we looked at each other and said, let's start a company. What should we call it?
And Packet. I mean, okay, fair enough. Let's not go into it too much, but
what's the one thing you have to buy from a cloud provider? Network, right? So that's how we got the Packet.
I kind of guessed as much. I think most people did, but cool. No, I remember thinking when I first became aware of you guys, like coming from the hosting industry, etc., thinking you're kind of nuts starting a hosting company or something even remotely like that in 2014, 2015.
That's what every venture capitalist told us too. So
I'm sure, but like, you know, it's really great where you guys are at, and maybe even before we kind of move on with today's topic, which I know you're really passionate about, and thanks so much for coming along.
Yep.
You've had a really exciting announcement like lately, something regarding Equinix. Would you like to fill us in there a tiny bit?
Sure. So like very few companies in the hosting space, Packet is venture funded. So we were funded originally by SoftBank, not the Vision Fund, SoftBank, the actual company, and Dell Technologies and Samsung and a few other great, I'd say, strategic investors. But recently we announced that we've been acquired by Equinix. So that's going to be closing this quarter. And funny story is when we got started, we said, you know, who should really do this? Aside from George at SoftLayer, you know, who had just sold to IBM a couple of years earlier, is like we said, you know, Equinix should really be doing this. You know, they've got this global scale and you know, access to all this connectivity ecosystem. Like if they provided processors, you know, at the same time as they did ping and power, wouldn't that be the cat's meow? And funny enough, we were able to develop that relationship, and you know, we'll be closing that in the next, hopefully, a couple of weeks, at which point we'll be expanding, you know, what we currently do now at, I'd say, a very modest scale into what they call Platform Equinix, which is 205 data centers in almost 60 regions around the world.
Only, yeah. Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, Equinix, like typically or traditionally, like of course, a very real estate like focused company. I know you're extremely aware, but like I think everyone was waiting for some kind of a play in that regard. Very happy it's you guys, very happy it's Packet. That's really cool. Without further ado, we may end up coming back to this, or somebody may have some kind of question about it. Let's see how we manage.
Okay.
But really, like starting off with this here, like what for you is the edge and where is the edge?
Well, I love the question, because if you ask 20 people, you get 20 answers. So you can really get a lot of variety. I'll just give you my answer, and I've been involved in a few things we'll talk about later to help try to get some common language around it. But I describe the edge from a business standpoint as really an enterprise concern right now. And from a technical standpoint, that has a lot of implications. I like to say it's not yet about flying taxis, right? Robot surgery and flying taxis is not yet the use case that's driving the edge. But what is driving the edge, and we'll talk about that in some future slides, is really like some enterprise concerns. You know, I need what I want, where I want it, and I need it to be, you know, my opinion, and I need it to be operated. And so when we think about edge computing as an industry today, I really think we're talking about the infrastructure edge. There's other edges out there like the device edge, right? And there's some, you know, kind of the further out to the network. But when we're talking about the network and infrastructure edge of today, I think we're really looking at a regional, you know, in-market infrastructure play. You know, what many of us in the old hosting days would have called like, you know, regional data centers. But that's a really big today issue for companies who are trying to drive new experiences or new business issues or new innovation. And the edge is sort of a stand-in, in my view, for how that is a developer-led or automated or operated experience versus one that we all know very well, which was do it yourself, right? And there's many nuances which will hit some of the use cases, but I would say the edge right now is regional, and it's about enterprise concerns. How do I get my infrastructure where I want it, when I want it?
Okay, I was going to ask you, remind me to come back to something like CDN or something like that later, more
Sure,
kind of on
absolutely.
the historic side. I think that's going to be interesting. But, you know, of course, who really needs the edge? I know this is actually one of your images. This is one of your sites, no?
Yeah, it looks like I didn't do that cabling. That is beautiful cabling, not mine.
It's not bad. It's not bad. Yeah, it's not bad.
Yeah, well, this represents a very interesting you know, problem, which we can talk about later on when we talk about the challenges. We'll come back to this picture and think about it. But when you think about who really, you know, needs the edge, I like to flip it around. I like to think about the use cases that are driving it. Certainly the hyperscalers and the telco operators and many of us who have been kind of living out there or pushing that infrastructure boundary are driving it, you know, are really involved in figuring it out. You know, you've got the hyperscalers, you know, like Amazon with Outposts, I'd say, in addition to partnerships with Verizon and whatnot, looking at how do I put infrastructure in market, right? So Outpost being a very managed hybrid cloud solution for people is a great example of edge computing. I think when you talk about further out, obviously the telcos have their opinion, and we've worked a lot with Sprint, for their IoT rollout, and it's taken us to weird places. There's, North Carolina and Sacramento and places that are not normal, and I'd say that's the edge for them. And so when it comes back to like who's really consuming at the edge, right now we do see the carriers driving a bit because of the 5G rollouts, and then the hyperscalers who are trying to solve hybrid cloud. Now on the other side, I think you will find some really interesting disruptors. You think about, I know you said I wasn't allowed to bring up autonomous vehicles.
One time.
Oh, one time. But you think about people who are trying to bring new experiences and innovation out there. Well, you got to go where the people are, and that inherently brings you. So I'd say probably a more interesting one to talk about would be retail, right? And smart cities, which are, smart cities. Is it flying taxis, or is it just making the street lights work better, right? There's a lot to those things because there's so much people and there's so much data being created and so much opportunity, and that requires compute.
Okay, and I know we'll end up coming back to this, but just thinking about let's say the form that the edge takes, and like thinking of some nice projects that are happening in Alexandria and stuff like that, where people are really thinking of every traffic light, every corner, etc. And we are being asked to prepare some kind of form factors that may be able to be installed at such locations.
Yep, I think you get a lot of variety. One of the early examples, and you can see some here, we've played with, I'd say this is fairly modest form factors. We're talking about micro-edge data centers. So to walk everyone through it, we've got a couple examples here. Starting on the right, this is a little mobile edge data center. We worked with a tower company called SBA Communications, and it's next to a football stadium. So if you watch the New England Patriots, this is about maybe a quarter mile away from the stadium in Foxborough. And certainly we're experimenting here, right? We're experimenting with how to put compute and network connectivity, and work with our friends in the 5G space to activate next to a large venue, which normally has no one there. And then, 10 times a year has 100,000 people. It's a really interesting edge use case, right? So learning from that. In the middle here, we've got a site that we did with Vapor, which is one of the real innovators in the edge data center space near O'Hare Airport in Chicago. And they actually have a few sites in Chicago that we deployed together at, which is really looking at things like, this is more on the public safety, municipal smart city side, where they had some early use cases with IBM and others that we came in to help power the computing for. But all of these are about learning, and where the actual money is, we're all starting to see it. And I think that's kind of the lesson of today, is that we're seeing it change from like interesting to like business, right? The use cases are maturing quickly, and we're starting to see things go from trials to production pretty quickly. The last thing here is on the left-hand side. We've taken a real collaborative approach, and we've worked with companies like Vapor and Ericsson and ARM and EdgeConneX to put together what is the second State of the Edge report. So if you go to the stateoftheedge.com, you can download a free report which has a bunch of cool research in it and use cases and thought leadership that is free. Grab it. But we found that the edge ecosystem to be moving very quickly. So keeping people current with it has been a challenge for all of us, and hopefully you guys might find that useful.
Thank you. I'm definitely going to read into it afterwards. I was going to ask regarding the edge sites that we're looking at here. I know they're just examples from many more, but maybe, sure. And I know from particular participants today that they're going to be interested in what were the challenges that you really faced there? Like, what are the things that stood out?
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So the one on the right was super hard because it was like in Boston in like January. And oh my gosh, was it cold, right? So like literally the physical part, I think we're going to run into a lot of physical issues at the edge, right? Like you said, whether it's form factors, you know, we were working with the city of New York on a project that's, you know, like every telephone pole, right? Like you're not just putting a bunch of, you know, one-use servers on top of a telephone pole, right? There's specialty equipment, environmentals. You know, the logistical things are crazy. Like, you know, there was like a big storm, and so the power hookup, you know, all the power, like this is running off of, you know, municipal power, and SBA, our partner, had to upgrade the power, but there was a big storm, so all the crews got pulled away for 3 weeks to go fix all the lines. Right, so it really is the Wild West out there when you're talking about some of the things we take for granted in traditional technology environments. Like, you know, in the summer it got really hot, and when some dude actually just literally unplugged a generator and everything went overheating. Right, so I think designing for that from an IT standpoint, but also from a consumer standpoint, you know, what's the SLA you're offering? How are people being redundant? You know, what's the use case that's driving this? And I think that's where some of the innovation is happening on the physical and the operational level.
Cool. We mentioned coming back to CDN, but let's say even going a little bit further back, like if you can take us really from how you see, let's say, the evolution of the edge.
Sure. I mean, this is like one of my favorite charts. I mean, this is probably not too blazingly revolutionary now to this audience, especially, but you know, you kind of look at it over time, and there's sort of this yin and yang effect of where we're putting the stuff, right? And obviously, you know, the first wave of computing was really big, and things were centralized, right? Mainframes and big deployments. You know, those great pictures of people loading computers into, you know, buildings that were the size of a truck, right? That we have now in our pockets. But then, you know, certainly moving distributed into the client server era, really, where we're all PCs, you know, and that really was the computing power and sort of the desktop. Obviously, the cloud, you know, in I'd say you know, the 2000s has been like just a redefinition of what does centralized mean. Where are we putting that? Who's managing the IT? And there's still a lot of gravity there. I think that phase is not done, and we're seeing a lot of overlap, and that the centralized cloud is going to continue to grow at an outstanding pace. But at the same time, we're seeing this trend again to distributed computing, and it's really fast. So I think they're overlapping in a way that's really dramatic right now. But you can kind of see the yin and the yang effect over the years, and I'm sure we'll get back to that to some degree.
Okay, and I know that some of your customers are doing things like CDN and like other things like that. Maybe a couple of the use cases that you're seeing, let's say, most prominently, and even if there are any surprising ones that you didn't expect as well.
Well, certainly I think there's the ones that sort of make sense, and usually they make sense because there's big money involved, right? So CDNs, you know, made sense, I'd say, back in the day. When they, you know, evolved into Akamai's and later the Cloudflares and whatnot, was because it's very expensive to move all those bits around, right? And so, you know, like when people are literally requesting the same bits, you know, the movie or the image, you know, cache it at the edge close to them, so you don't have to pay. I mean, there's obviously a cost of latency and the user experience, but also just the act of moving things around. And I think we're seeing that right now at the edge related to, say, 5G, right? 5G is not a driver of the edge. I think it is the first use case of the edge, right? It needs it because it's too expensive to backhaul all the data and to run it all out there. You have to move the workload and the processing and the EPCs and things in market. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense economically, nor does the experience work. So one thing that surprised me is in really these other industries. We think about technology and we think about application delivery and security and whatnot, but I've been so surprised to see the movement in retail, smart retail. You know, Chick-fil-A is one of the like innovators in edge computing. They're using Kubernetes to automate the, you know, basically the IT system at all the Chick-fil-A's. That's pretty cool. Another one that I think is super great is in healthcare, right? We're seeing, you know, we all depend on, I don't know, you know, image technicians to review our x-rays or CAT scans, and things in real time can be better judged by computers. You know, if you did so when we did our trial in Boston, we actually had a user come out of the woodwork and said, hey, I'm doing a trial with, a hospital in Boston. I need low latency access to some GPUs so I can help do colonoscopies better. Like, okay, that's a real world use case. Like, that's it today. And so I've been really struck by some of these, they don't think edge computing. They think, I just need things that are this close and this, I need them like this. And that's really, I think, a fascinating aspect of the edge. It's not generic, right? We're finding a lot of different use cases that are popping up.
Yeah, tiny sidebar for you and something that will interest you and maybe some others. There was an interesting thing from Anderson Horowitz recently calling bullshit on so many of the AI startups and stuff like that. I don't know if you've seen that, but
I did. Yeah, it was like the economics just don't work, right?
Exactly. Quite interesting. And frequently, of course, even though you have things like the image recognition or stuff like that, you need a pair of eyes, like to whatever. But apparently, it really helps you to catch most of the cases. So, let's not go too
it's
far
how to improve. I
think
it's not one or the other. The use case that we were looking at was like basically, or they were doing image recognition and they were basically helping to narrow the focus of the technician down to like, look at these ones, versus sort of like, looking through thousands of images in a day is really difficult.
Yeah, and it's like, like police work and stuff like that with facial recognition and trying to trace and track the movements of certain terrorists or criminals. And it used to be, or it still is today to a huge degree, a very manual piece of labor where someone is looking at 240 or 500 feeds and just to find something. But now, of course, you can help narrow it down.
Patterns, yep.
Yeah, cool. All right, so what's the story tomorrow? What's coming up?
More.
Oh, okay.
Wait, shocker. Yeah, I think the this is just a screenshot we took from IDC. Big numbers are popping out and you'll see them everywhere. We did one in the State of the Edge report, 700 billion over 10 years, bottoms up approach, blah, blah, blah. Of course, it all depends how you're counting, but I'd say the trend driving the numbers is the important thing. We're seeing, more and more data being created. Experiences are more and more immersive and more connected, right? It's, I like to say, I have kids that are 11 and 13, and they're like really confused when things take time. It's like, how come that didn't happen right away? Because there's a lot of real-time experiences in their life, right? Everything from messaging to like getting a taxi. And so real-time, connected, immersive means data processing things, and so the trends driving more distributed computing and more specialized computing are real. And so we're seeing that kind of happen, I'd say faster than many expected, and certainly faster than I expected. Things like that slide on previous about IoT. IoT sounds kind of, industrial until you think about Chick-fil-A doing it too, and then it's like, oh, well, Starbucks is doing it, Amazon Go stores are doing it. Like, okay, now we're talking, that's just one little slice of things. What about municipal? And oh, wow, that's big. And, regulation is enforcing data gravity and all kinds of things are creating stuff. And we have to do things with that. And that's what edge computing is really, the story of the next 5 years is kind of catching up with that growth and figuring out how to monetize that. Yeah.
I'm filtering out the noise that doesn't need to go everywhere. Yeah, cool. You were mentioning all those big numbers. We're seeing different things. We saw 50%, we're looking at 75% of stuff which is going to be processed at the edge, etc. Your view?
I mean, yes. And again, I come back to the money. As my brother always said that. So tell me about the money. And it comes down to money, moving stuff around and getting a great, there's the old, I'm not allowed to mention it, autonomous something.
It's okay, you're allowed, you're allowed.
What's valuable? I guess let's use airplane. But, the amount of data that is generated by an airplane, it needs to be dealt with. Yeah, some of that's super valuable, some of it's not. Computers are the best way to deal with, filtering that out and understanding. Otherwise, we just simply can't. I think part of this is a scale issue as our world becomes more technology driven. Do we just store everything and build more computers? I mean, we're doing about 7% of the world's power right now to data centers. And, do we just keep doubling that every 10 years? That seems unsustainable. you know, we have to think about how we're creating solutions that are more efficient, more effective. And that means that you have to have more specialized, you know, more specialized infrastructure when you scale.
Okay. We're back a little bit again to the challenges that you were experiencing, but just all in general.
Sure. I mean, I think the benefits are easy to talk about. So we've kind of been doing that, you know, latency, cost, you know, user experience, all that stuff, right? So got it. But the challenges are legit,
Yeah.
Especially when we're trying to kind of, you know, take an experience. I'd say the biggest challenge right now is to take a cloud experience, which is like IT is becoming like consumable to software, right? And so like, got it. We all love that. We don't want to give it up. Like, it just works. It's a great feeling. And yet the reality of doing that in weird environments, in thousands of places versus dozens of places, in even knowing, so like what those networks are, you know, like, did you, you didn't grow up in the US, but we had 9-digit telephone numbers, okay? And my area code was 714. And then 970 of my phone number I grew with. And what that tells you, or what it used to tell you for sure, was the exact regional central office from which your telephone line was served. 714 was regional, 970 was basically the neighborhood, done, right? And that provided, you know, a certain physicality to a network. Right now, some of the challenges we have are physical, but some of them are also programmatic. You know, you ask a developer today to tell you, so tell me the value of that computing power that Packet just gave you in Foxborough, Massachusetts, right? And, you know, it's like, well, I don't know. Tell me which networks it's connected to, the historical latency of them, what does it cost? You know, can I get where I need it to go? Is that around, is that a sort of a scenic route, you know, to my user at the football stadium or not? Like, none of that's going to be sort of like, because I said so. It's going to be programmatic. And so there's challenges that we have on the physical side, such as cooling, such as form factor, such as power. And then there's the, you know, and maintenance, right? Operations. And then there's the software consumable side, which I think is really interesting. And we have to kind of meld these worlds together and create some new architectures.
You are preaching to the converted, whatever it is here. As I was telling you before, there's some of the stuff that we're working on, like especially to handle those edge situations. And a lot of it has to do with our CTO, a guy called Scott Noteboom, who had some time at Apple and at Yahoo beforehand. And Scott always tells this lovely story of an edge location in Cairo where a server failed, and it took many thousands of dollars and over a week to replace it. And someone went with a suitcase with the server in it in order to replace it. Whereas obviously what we're working on, and hopefully we'll be sharing stuff later, but like, you know, in order to be able to do that, and because as I agree with you, even leaving form factor, leaving power, leaving stuff aside, when you have that many of these small sites, how are you going to maintain them, and how are you going to actually be able to have people going out to them? Either you have a bunch of people on the road, and it may seem quite easy in countries where they have a developed road network, but like move to somewhere like the Middle East or something like that. Yes, they have some key lines, but a lot of things are just pure desert or pure nothingness. Really, really hard to reach. So you need to prepare for that.
And then do you trust, you know, all that to happen? Like right now we have this lovely sensibility that's like, well, there's a man trap and a security guard, so it must be safe. And, you know, you know, when you're putting it next to a football stadium or in the desert, no such luck, right? And so the idea of trust, maintenance, and operations, maybe that's like repurposing of all the scooter companies. You know, instead of in the data center, we have people on skateboards. We can use all the scooters and we can go around, and it's probably not going to work. But I think the idea of optimizing for that, I think the form factor that you listed here is actually hugely important, right? You know, right now, I think we said we would come back to that picture of our beautiful cabling.
Yeah, let's do that really quickly here.
You have to be pretty damn good at it to just do that. That is hard, right? So now we need to be like, oh, cool. the 17th one from the top, we're not sure, but might not be in good shape anymore. Can someone go take a look and replace it? And by the way,
taking that one out the cables in front of it. This is also crazy.
And don't disrupt anything else about this, because they're all, like making me money right now / being used. And you got that right, Mr. Remote person in like, Peoria? Like, probably not.
Yeah.
So like we have to make it, so the marketing guy or the UPS guy or anyone else or a robot. Like we've always asked for data center robots. Can we please have robots? Can just handle this. Much like I always like to joke, it's easier to get a satellite into space than a server into Hong Kong, because 30 years ago someone had a class experiment. Hey, design a satellite in this shape, and that actually became the form factor where as long as you build it into this shape with this thing, you can send a satellite on the next thing. I mean,
yeah,
it's kind of amazing. Yeah, but you try and get like a piece of IT equipment into Cairo or Hong Kong, good luck, right? We all know how hard that is. Yeah,
we certainly do. So I think basically we covered most of these things here. And really what I'd like to do is I'd like to also just open things up for people who may be interested in asking some questions as well, just reminding anyone who's currently tuned in, please. And also, of course, a reminder, if there are any questions that come in afterwards that we don't get to, or anything that people have afterwards, Jacob and I will gladly answer them, or attempt to answer them, or get in touch with you afterwards. But I think this was actually Matteo, who couldn't be with us today, who put this particular thing together, talking about the fact that it's not a game for all. But I think you were saying it's pretty much for all, is it?
Yeah, well, I think certainly we see all the big tech companies playing at the edge right now for obvious reasons. My angle on this is that it's collaborative, right? And so that even if you're going for like the clear, obvious use case, you're still involving a lot of different logos, partners, solutions, because whether it's, hey, it might be clear when you do it in Chicago, but like what you said, what about in Cairo? There may be requirements, that are different. I think we're seeing the edge be a highly collaborative ecosystem. That's, that kind of goes back to my comment earlier about enterprise. It's not just, oh, this should work for everyone. Well, it's not generic, so it actually doesn't work for me. What I need is something very specialized to me, and that inherently leads you to a lot of different partners.
Yeah, and we've been seeing a lot of things like with regulation regarding financial services and stuff like that lately, where countries are really clamping down and they want to have all of that kind of sensitive data only in the country or mostly in the country. So it's forcing some of the US players, some of the large credit card companies, people like that, to have those edge deployments around the world. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, so I think it's interesting. The one thing I would add to this slide when we talked about it is we tend to come at it as technologists, but I think there's some really interesting logos at the edge. They're just consuming it, hopefully. But we talked before this about Chick-fil-A, right? And companies like John Deere or BMW, are really at the forefront in consuming that value. And some of them are creating it too. But I love to tell the story of John Deere, which has essentially become a data company. They just happen to be looking at data in the soil and telling you how to plant your seeds and doing it for you. So satellite-driven, data-driven, IoT-driven company that a few years ago, made tractors. And I think we're seeing that transformation as companies essentially all become digital companies. That the edge is a real big part of that story, whether they call it that right now or not.
Yeah. Did they make the lawnmowers that you used to use when you were 10?
Oh no, I can't even remember which. That's a great question. I have to look that up.
Okay, I'm going to ask Zach that one next time I see him. I didn't know you guys had that business. That sounds cool. Apart from that, just really regarding Packet and what the future holds for you, just to get an idea. I know moving into this larger environment and being able to, I suppose, put some more dollars also behind what you're doing. Maybe any other things that are up and coming that you can talk about?
Yeah, sure. So, I think you described Equinix as primarily a real estate company, which is funny. That's how I would describe them too, but they would say something different. They would say they're an ecosystem company of connectivity. They really value bringing networks together and using those to connect people. What I think we add to that equation and what we're excited about doing together is really on how can we connect the world of software and the world of networks and provide a neutral place, right? We've always been super partner friendly. We take a slightly different approach than some of the other cloud providers by being essentially focused only on the infrastructure layer and not going into other parts of it. And I think that that's a really good alignment. So we'll hopefully take our expertise in, we always called it subscale infrastructure, versus hyperscale infrastructure, and roll that out with the backing of the Equinix platform and capital, but also just their connectivity part, which I think is really, really fun. I think we're going to see a lot of things over the next year or two where we push the boundaries on that jointly. And it's pretty exciting to have global reach. So we got a lot to figure out there, a lot of things that we're all going to need to work together on, such as what you guys are doing and bringing innovation there, because it's frankly we're not on a super sustainable path when it comes to how we deploy and operate technology. I think we gotta innovate, and that's the best part of all of it.
Yeah, I think really important what you just said regarding not just looking at one layer or one part, so not just the infrastructure, not just the software. You mentioned earlier that software is now defining a lot of the hardware design and things like that, which is fantastic. I think we're also taking a very similar approach where we're looking at things, everyone thinks, okay, cooling, whatever like that. It happens to be the biggest pain in the ass that's out there when it comes to stuff like this. So it's just a catalyst for change, but we're trying to look at it also in a holistic way, because you have the cooling, but you have the backup power, you have the connectivity, you have the hardware, the software, and everything, when it's properly interconnected, it's going to be smarter and it's going to be more sustainable, etc. It'll be a better world for us.
We're talking about a new architecture, really. And I think that's something you see, those yings and yangs we talked about, centralized, distributed, and now the scale is just becoming significant, right? And where in the 60s maybe you had top companies doing computing. Now it's like everyone on the planet is touching computing in the future. So there's like the scale of the challenges and the architectures that we need. I think even just the architecture of the internet is changing as part of this, and we're moving beyond the 18 interconnection points that have done most of the traffic to like I don't know, got to think about Shenzhen now, right? Like it's different.
What are the people in Northern Virginia going to do? This is the question.
Yeah, well, probably a lot of what they're doing now.
Yeah, absolutely, more of it, I would say.
Very cool.
Oh, cool. Just really, once again, thank you so much for joining me here today, and I hope we're going to get a chance to see each other sometime soon. And I believe we will at some of these particular events. I know that the Submer team, myself included, along with our CTO Scott, CEO Danny, and co-founder Paul, are going to be at the OCP Global Summit next week. Yeah, it's a good trip.
You'll see my evil twin there. You should definitely keep an eye out. He's no glasses and skinny.
I know, I know. Not, yeah, but okay, cool. And regarding in London, so DCW in London, that's the week after that. Then I believe there's a small chance we might see each other then in New York. I know that's where a lot of you guys hang out. You're in Lower Manhattan. I believe this is in Midtown somewhere, if I'm not mistaken.
Probably we can make it up there. Yeah.
Okay, we'll get you some tokens for the subway or something. And then one of the best events of the year, definitely information-wise, and anyone who hasn't considered it, the Infrastructure Summit in Toronto. Really, it's less of a sponsor-led show or whatever else it is. It is actually where people go to learn from each other and really share with each other. There's a lot of conversations. There's a lot of people who are talking about what they've really done. And I know you guys had a big session there last year. I remember that. And I think you're going to be a big part of it this year too. Yeah,
it's a great event that's just really kind of grown over the last 2 or 3 years. And if you haven't been to Toronto recently, you should. It's great.
Yeah, yeah, it's a crazy big city, hey? And also, of course, DCD Madrid, which is more of a little local show from our standpoint here, but hopefully everything health-wise and everything until the middle of the year will be calmed down, because obviously this is the reason why we're not together with Packet in person. We are headquartered just down the road from where Mobile World Congress normally takes place, and as most of you know, that was cancelled. These things happen. I think it was a sensible decision, and I think a lot of people support that. So because we have this wonderful technology, we can still do these things.
That's
there we
right.
go.
Although we would love to do it in Barcelona again. So.
Absolutely, and next time we will. Next time we will. Jacob, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it. Everyone who's tuned in and everything, thank you all so much too. Hoping to see you very soon. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.